Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, and we're back for our second episode this week as we're joined by the author of Maximizing Playoff Odds, a Baltimore Orioles newsletter, which is available through Substack, and the writer of the Top 30 Baltimore Orioles Prospects Report for Baseball America, which appears in the 2022 Baseball America Prospect Handbook. He is Jon Meoli. John, how are you?
I'm well. Three-timers club. Let's go, boys.
Yep, you and just one other guest, Stephen Loftus. So limited group.
Deserves a T-shirt or something.
Come draft time. He's gonna lap me come draft time. I'm sure it's gonna be a runaway by the next time we talk in the summer.
Well, either way, limited group, and you've surpassed Eric Garfield, Matt Blood, and Connor Newcomb. So passing a good group there.
Good. It's good to be looked up to, especially by those guys.
So looking at the top 30 as a whole for the Orioles right now, where do you think the Orioles farm system stands?
I think it's in a pretty good spot. I think that this year specifically different from last year's, or not last year's, last year's was how few pitchers there were compared to years past, and that's not necessarily a knock on the pitchers that are there. It's just a reflection of how they've drafted so many position players. There's been a ton of talented college bats. Those are the kinds of guys who are easy to rank highly in these rankings. So I think that the difference, and it kind of explains where the system is. There just aren't a lot of pitchers until you get deeper into the list. Just speaks to what the Orioles' priorities have been over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and speaking of pitchers, Drew Rom, he's a guy he's pretty young. We started to see a bit of a velocity tick up from him last year. Yeah. And it showed itself by him having some pretty good results, especially down the stretch run in Double-A. Is there more upside with him now that he's sitting like 92, 93 instead of 89, 90? And it seems like his off-speed stuff's pretty good too.
I think so, and I think that there's always the Orioles have seen both things happen. Pretty truthfully, I think you can say John is a little bit of a different animal. He was a college guy. He was around forever. He had pretty much gotten to where he was going to get, and he got better. I think an apt comparison would be someone like Bruce Zimmerman. A couple of ticks of velocity really made a huge difference because he had all the rest. He knew how to pitch. He just was able to kind of amplify what he did and improve it in that sense. But I also think somebody Drew Rom is unfortunately, and it's just the nature of what kind of pitcher he started out as. There are lefties who throw in the high 80s who are drafted out of school or drafted at college who need to prove it every step of the way because that's not a typical profile. So I think that he's done. And when you ask about upside being, I think the fact that he's shown he can add velocity, he's shown that his the skills he had while he was throwing, bumping up against Andy and topping out around there. I think skills that he had then carrying over is really an impressive thing to see. I think only get there once you're talking about adding velocity, and I think the fact that he did that and learned the things that he did really, really, really put him in a unique class in this organization.
Speaking of another pitcher, I know we talk about all the college hitters and everything at the top of the organization, but we like to dig deep. We like the sleepers here. Another pitcher on this list that cracked your top 30 is Kyle Bronovich. I think he's at number 28 on Baseball America's list. Fangraphs has him all the way up at 17. Kind of went largely overlooked last year, and I think you look at the fastball velo first and foremost, and it's not really there. So I feel like a lot of people will probably continue to overlook him. But what kind of feedback did you get on Bronovich when you were doing your research for this list?
I would put him in a category with a couple other guys. Some of them made the list and some of them who didn't, where it's almost like, where people, it's kind of the same prove it category as those, pitchability lefties who have to show they can at every level, they can get better. I'm thinking as you're asking this question about something that I talked to David Hess about like up to the minors. He was like, all you need is a fastball. You can, throw your fastball almost exclusive and get guys out. I mean, I remember it was Zach Lowther's. I'm really rambling, but I feel like it was like Zach Lowther's first pro start. Struck out like 12 guys in innings, and it was like a really cold Delmarva, and he threw almost exclusively fastballs. You could do that at that level, and you're good. You have command of one secondary pitch to put on high A, and then you need to have more than that to pitch well in Double A, and that's kind of the benchmarks that you go up. And you look at somebody like Bronovich, who has little life on his fastball. If it's his breaking ball, like a spike curveball type deal, that is a secondary. Bring this up as I'm looking at it. That's a pitch that really, knuckle curveball. That moves a lot of different ways. I think that it's to be about him harnessing that and learning to make it do what he wants to do all the time, as opposed to having it do what it does, and having that kind of vary from pitch to pitch. I think that a skill like that is really important to have. Now, is there, rotation stuff that possibly you can't really write anybody out of the rotation until the team out of the rotation. I think that he has a lot of in his favor, most notably that the Orioles, are pretty invested in that Dylan Bundy trade look good, and he's part of that mix.
So we'll go listener a question here just to build off of this from Vivek. Would you say there's a nice depth of number 4 and 5 starters in the current system?
I would say so. I think that outside of the big guys, the Grayson Rodriguez, the DL Hall, that's what you're looking at with a lot of the starting pitching prospects that are in the organization, whether it's guys who are, very, very close to the majors, and Kyle Bradish, Mike Bound, guys who've already been in the majors. I listed them all off on the radio today. I felt it took like 45 minutes. Dean Kramer and Bruce Zimmerman, Keegan Aiken, as well as Zach Lowther, guys I've talked about. I feel like that is where there are opportunities to really fill a role for those guys. And I think that this year, is going to be where they aren't counted on to be like, rotation savers. Like, it would be great if one or two of the guys who we've talked about can just, log 140 like workman-like innings. And somebody can seize that role, because they don't have to be a guy that you're like relying on to go like, 6+ every game. They don't have to be John Means. They don't have to be Jordan Lyles. They don't have to go out there and have sky-high expectations like the top prospects are going to. So I think the answer is yes. I think there might be varying levels of upside lower in the system, but we're more talking about at this point, who can be the guy to complement those top prospects, and who can be the guy to be filling in those innings as kind of a swingman type as this present season goes forward.
So shifting gears and looking at outfielders for a moment, Ucl Diaz this year falls to 23rd in the top 30 list, and his struggles at this point are well chronicled with injuries, the fact he was not that effective when he was on the field last year. But at your newsletter recently, you took a pretty in-depth look at sort of the ups and downs he's had really since he came into the Orioles farm system. What do you think, other than injuries, is kind of behind his struggles, and is there any hope for him to bounce back a little bit this year?
I think that there has to be some kind of bounce, whether it's the dead cat bounce or an actual bounce, like an actual turnaround. I think that there's too much talent there to have it go like this forever. Last year was bad for a number of reasons, and I think that, truthfully, I believe I wrote in that as he was turning around that first full season in Bowie, he was out there with Keith Bodie, the hitting coach, like every single day before BB, and they were really, really working hard to get him to where he wanted to be. And you talk to guys on that Bowie team from 2019, and they credited him for basically carrying them once they got to the playoffs. He was like ready to perform when the time came. The problem is that there's no way to be Ucl Diaz, the guy they traded Manny Machado for, anymore. There's just not really an avenue for that to deliver for the Orioles. And when you look at the opportunities that are him in the outfield, they're limited. Brandon Hyde gonna say that he wants Ucl Diaz on his bench over like a Ryan McKenna type. I'm not sure he's going to do that. Is he going to, are the Orioles going to trade Anthony Santander and D. Stewart all in one fell swoop so they can play Ucl Diaz in right field every day? Like, I don't think they're going to do that either. So So performance, there are a ton of reasons probably to explain what happened. I think that health was going to be a big part of it, and I think that there's some natural things in his swing that make it difficult for him to produce consistently. But when he does produce, it's really impressive. I think that he is, I don't think that it's like a hopeless case, but I would be very surprised if, to that end, this wasn't one of those springs where he's like, all of a sudden it's like the second week of games and he's hit a couple of like, eighth inning home run, like is like starting to get the buzz going again, because it wasn't the case in the past. Definitely knows now that is the time to get one.
Yeah, it's kind of now or never for him. And one of the newer international signings, Anderson De Los Santos, he kind of stands out at number 30 on your list. He had a great year in the DSL. Not really sure what, how to handle the DSL stats. We're kind of new to the international guys, but what are your thoughts on him, both inside and outside of the organization? What are you hearing?
So I think he was one where, the stats are obviously what leads you to it. But when you talk about it, it's more of a traditional, it's more of a traditional contact profile that needs to be refined. Whereas the other international prospect Orioles have signed in that 2021 draft class or international class. I don't know what to call them. But in the recent one before this year, those guys, when you talk about Mayo and Michael Hernandez, they are lauded for having, plate discipline that's very advanced from what is typically expected, of a player signed out of Latin America playing in DSL. I think that, De Los Santos is a little more aggressive in his swing. And it works out when he hits it. He hits it hard and he, hits it for bases and it goes pretty far. But I think that it just kind of speaks to the, the presence of the international. And I think, it's the same thing. I think we talked about it for number 10. When you have a cutoff like this, you're like, who do I want represented here? Like, who would be here? And for number 2 was Kobe Mayo, and I turned out to be the low man on the totem pole there. And, I'm just glad it wasn't, these other things came out, that it wasn't like De Los Santos being like, number 12 and making me look like I lowballed him too.
Nice. Well, how do you decide, kind of switching gears here from the high upside of Anderson De Los Santos as international guys to some of the guys that struggled? We talked about Ucl Diaz already, but like Adam Hall, Jahmai Jones, Kevin Smith too, especially. How do you decide like how far you drop these players who had those big struggles last year?
So I kind of, as a guiding principle, I would say I'm very understanding of injuries, that they happen. I know that they're just something's, there's nothing you can do about it. It's hard to punish someone for a one-off type deal like that. I think, if you're talking about someone who keeps getting hurt, I think that there's a little bit of, there's something to build into the kind of the equation for that. But somebody like Adam Hall, who, he basically like camp, I believe it was his hamstring that he pulled during spring training. He was well enough to play, Aberdeen to start season, but without a lot of spring training action and without, the kind of game prep that everyone else had. And all of a sudden they're playing Hudson Valley and all these teams with a bunch of guys throwing like upper 90s, and it snowballs, and all of a sudden you're having I don't know that there's any way to hold him. I think it's still there. Someone like, who else have you mentioned? Jahmai Jones, some injury in there. I think that if we're being perfectly honest, I had to win, like on the big leagues too. He got out on him quick. I don't know if it came up with him from the minors, if team just realized that, they could jam him inside and they were going to get him out big leagues. But once they realized it, it was a quick time in the big leagues for him. And I think that, that's a real red flag, but it's also, somebody who came off, a COVID year and changed organizations, had all this stuff and had some physical to go along with it. Who are we asked about him? I'm rambling.
I think that hit most of them. Really, the only other guy was Kevin Smith, and that's the guy who we watched him just dominate in Bowie. And then when he got to Norfolk, it was spotty, typical, struggles, adjustments, we'll say, to AAA. But then you made the note there in his blurb, too, that I picked up on as the season was ending. Less than 50% of the pitches he threw landed for a strike over that final month of the year. And I think there's also like a little drop in his velo. How do you weigh that with a guy like Kevin Smith, who, there's really not a lot of projection left there with him? He's at AAA and he has the struggles that he have. Do you take a lot of stock into that, or it's just weird timing right now and start fresh in 2022 with him?
I think you do, and I think that's where, even though there's a lot of new faces, in the organization who are in prominent roles, I think it's where you develop, a sense of trust, and you understand, that people, if people don't like somebody, if they they're shot or they think they don't have it, like, tell you, and like they'll ask you not to write it, obviously, but they'll tell you. And with Kevin Smith, there wasn't anything like that. I think that when somebody falls off that steep, having so well at the beginning of the season, there's always a reason for it, and I think that like respecting that reason and understanding that reason and like baking it in, there's a border between like excuse making for these guys and for like a legitimate explanation. And I think that on where it comes to Kevin Smith, I was pretty satisfied with what I heard as to what happened. Not something that he'd ever dealt with before. If you look at his stats, if you look at how he performed earlier in the season, if you look at why the Orioles acquired him, he's not someone who this would happen to. And I don't think they would, have added them to the roster. I don't think that they would, have stuck up for him if they didn't, whatever happened at the end of last year, was going to be able to clean slated this spring. So I'm interested in how it goes, because honestly, I believe he was ranked ahead of, all those lefties who made their days last year, 2021 handbook. And that was because the Orioles, truthfully believed he was better than a lot of those guys. And he will have opportunity. He will be on a pretty level playing field with all those guys. The fact that he's not really getting mentioned in any of these conversations, rattling off, a half dozen guys who have been in AAA and can be pitching in the big leagues this year. Like that's the consequence, I guess, of him falling off the way he did. But I don't know that that's also going to be the reason why you shouldn't consider him going forward.
I have to imagine that when you're putting these lists together and you're dealing with players like that, like the line you just talked about between legitimate issues that maybe can be solved versus excuses, that has to be tough to figure out where it is sometimes, I would imagine.
It is. I think that, in the past, Orioles front office, like there was a lot of like sides to everything. There were people who like players that were drafted by the team and traded for by the team, people who didn't, and there were certain things, and you just didn't know what you were going to get. I think now you kind of know what you're going to get, and I think there's an understanding of like what will be the what am I trying to say? Of like what is an appropriate something to happen, like sometimes I ask like, hey, what happened? I have no idea. They will say, I have no idea what happened, and that's a problem. Like, could you say, oh, maybe this happened, or maybe like he is dealing with something at home. There's a million reasons anything could happen, and sometimes you just don't know, and like sometimes you do know. And if it's like, if you just have to kind of weigh it in your mind, like what the reason is, and kind of see. At the end of the day, we're talking about like something that may not have a huge bearing on future performance. If somebody just loses strike zone for a month, he hasn't lost it forever, and I think that's the hit to look for. You have to look at the pitches. You have to look at the overall body of work and what that could be, at the big league level. And just because somebody like Kevin Smith had a really tough end to the season, it's really unfortunate, but it's not something that you are going to, completely off for.
So we'll turn our attention back to some of the players the Orioles have acquired internationally. And you just touched on them a few minutes ago, which is Michael Hernandez and Samuel Basallo. You talked about how both of them have such advanced plate approaches, good plate discipline for their age, and both of them are inside the top 15 on this list. So what are you hearing about them that would warrant putting them this high at this point?
I think that it's really an upside play, and the same way that it also, I guess these are on the way. So first of all, it's an upside play. Like if these players pan out the way that the Orioles and by virtue of how much they signed for the industry, think they will, these are going to be legitimate like impact figures. They are valuable for a number of reasons. They're valuable for what they can bring to the organization on the field. They're valuable for what they get the organization in trades, if they decide to go that route, and they're supremely talented. These players are identified for a reason because they're very good at very young ages, and I think when you look at a team like the Orioles specifically, they are very attuned to what they can work with. When we talk about players, plate discipline and pitch recognition being precocious, that usually comes with being able to put the bat on the ball. And while it takes showcase type power, if it takes batting practice type power to get signed as a national, it's harder to translate that into games for some people. And I think I heard, and what I was told about these players specifically was that as the season went on, it was more consistent hard contact. And when you hear about players that the Orioles are high on, it's because, as the season goes on, as their careers are going on, they're hitting the ball hard more often. They're hitting the ball hard and in the air more often. It's not, it's not just hard contact. Somebody like Kobe Mayo who had trouble elevating the ball as an amateur and comes in, and they change a few things, and now everybody loves Kobe Mayo. The same types of things were happening in the DSL with these players. So I think that is that is the main reason. And truthfully, there's just like a little bit of like how sausage is made. Like, if somebody's a first round pick and they're a good player, like they're going to be ranked in an organization's top 5, no matter what. And it's just a matter of what. And if you sign for 7 figures, you're going to be pretty highly in an organization. So that's like, that's a less answery way of answering it. But that's that's where it is. But that's something truthfully I never really had to deal with. These were plopped into this year's rankings around sometime in the spring. That's when they put like the most recent round of international signings in. So the ones that the Orioles signed in January, they will go into the rankings, be able to slot them where they think appropriate in a month or so, I would say. And baseline for me, because I've never really had to compare a 16, 17-year-old player in the DSL to a college draftee who was traded for Michael Givens and played, a really good season in Bowie. Like, how do you compare that? It's apples to oranges, to use a cliche, and it's also really hard because unless you're down in Florida, for instance, you don't get to see this too.
All right. Speaking of that, well, let's find out where you would have slot these guys. That was my next question. A guy like Braylon Tavera, who set the record for amount of money again. It seems like that's just going to keep happening year after year. $1.7 million. Leandro Arias, who Fangraphs has all the way up at, I think, number 12 already. And Cesar Prieto, who was performed pretty well in the Cuban League and seems pretty polished for a guy. He's not one of these 16-year-old guys. Where would you slot like those 3 guys if you were forced to do so right now?
Oh boy! All right, let me look at this. I would say in a general range, you're talking. I mean, it's really wide to say like 11 to 25, but I think that's the kind of area you're going in. I think that there are international signees who can like right into an organization's top 10. Not sure if any of these will qualify, but I think that it just speaks to the caliber of players that they're selecting. That is a possibility that we're talking. Slotting these guys into, realistically the top 25. So truthfully, I don't have an answer. I would need to look into it more, but I do think they would be ranked, and I would actually be interested to see where they put somebody like Prieto, because it's probably an easier comp, and I think that if you're hearing about, if you see the type of player that he's at, matches the description of what we've been, hearing about him, he could be a like performer type, and you want to be high on those types of guys.
Maybe a more reasonable way to ask is, where would you rank those three between each other? Who would you put between those 1, 2, 3?
I think it would probably be in the order that you gave. I think Tavares probably the tops of probably the tops of the heap, just by the amount of money. I was really interested to see some of the opinions on Urias and how it went. I think that as this process goes on, I don't know how long it's going to be before there's an international draft. There's going to be one. I think that you're going to see like an Orioles type of player emerge, and that player is going to be just hitter in the Latin American market. I think that they are going to. I think that we're going to see before long like what the pitchers they acquire through those avenues are. It's a little harder to tell from our. And I think that the Orioles don't have as targeted a pitching preference as they do for a hitter. Like they just like pitchers with stuff. Like doesn't matter what the stuff is, they just want you to have like good stuff. Like whatever your stuff is, just be good at it. Hitters, like they like guys who make a lot of contact, who don't swing and miss all, who hit the ball hard in the air. And I think that when someone Fangraphs that has access to a lot of data, and also people with access to a lot of data, when they rank some high, it's because their batted ball data from the showcase circuit, from the scouting circuits, reads really favorably. I'm just projecting here, but I would assume that the Orioles signed him, and that is why the Orioles, and then why he ranks where he would in the Orioles system. And I think Prieto is one of those, wild cards. The Orioles have had a checkered history of some, young 20-somethings from with Dario Alvarez, Henry Urrutia. They got to the big leagues. I think Dario Alvarez got to the big leagues. I don't remember for sure though. I know Henry Urrutia did. He hit that home. But it's just harder to. It's probably the order to kind of what's going to be until you see it domestically. So I would go in the order you gave as a long answer to a question.
Switching back to stateside players that have progressed pretty high up in the system already, and pitchers with stuff. My only issue with the top 30 list is that I don't see Brandon Young. And so I'm assuming he's number 31 if you were to stretch this out a little bit. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, I believe so. I think he's 32 actually. I did do, and I only did that because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe BA did companion. It's like, here's somebody from outside the top 30 of each of these orgs who could break out. And he was 30 because they highlighted him as 32. I could bring that up as we're going through another question, but yeah, I think that is like a true breakout candidate. They might have actually singled him out because I might have like circled him as the one to like, hey, this is the guy who's going to break out. I think that him more than most is the biggest difference between the stuff you saw and the stuff that the Orioles believe is in there and can be. And that was one of those where without having as many people outside who felt as strongly as the Orioles did, it was just had to leave out. I know that there's probably inside the organization that aren't happy about that. But I feel like there's going to be, there's going to be an opportunity for him to prove them right and to prove what he is. I think that in the same way that a lot of Orioles pitchers didn't get to benefit from being able to use full stuff because of the innings limits that they were on, and just the deliberate way that pitchers were built up and used. My sense was that the Orioles believe there will be an uptick in what he's able to do when he's able to deeper into games and kind of build that arm strength up, because he's a horse. He's a big dude. And that's a pitcher who can get stronger as the game goes on, who can overpower hitters early and then get them up later, type of stuff that you kind of project as you're looking at what Grayson Rodriguez was going to do. As if he was able to face hitters a third time last year, I think that Brandon kind of in that same category where there is that potential because of the circumstance he was pitching in under in 2021, is where that that gap in what he could be versus what he was came. But yeah, I'm sure if I went back and looked at the grades too, it's a matter of having like 30, 31, 32. They're probably all the same. I have no idea who 31 was. I'm going to look that up right now. I know that makes for bad audio. Actually, I don't have a story, so this will take me
We are waiting on pins and needles. I know that.
I'm listening. I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah. I just love it. Brandon Young is just I don't know what it was. I can't pinpoint exactly, but as soon as the Orioles announced that signing, I remember trying to find a video. He had like one of his college starts from that pandemic season up on his college website. It was still archived, and I watched it and just fell in love instantly. So I'm loving what you're saying about him, and I love that the Orioles are seem to be high on him as well.
Yeah, and he was something that you heard about even through, through camp, fall national camp in 2020, or like this guy. I tried a bunch of times to get out to see him. Just never worked out. Truthfully, that's part of this too. If I'm hearing inside the organization that he's XYZ and people outside, I didn't really that. If you can kind of judge a little bit closer as to what you want to believe and what you want to put your name on. And he was another guy that, as much as I had to get out to see him, but like I said, to prove me wrong. This is not good. Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
Do not worry about it.
Just so I could give away the extra 10 players that I ranked here. I'm sure you'll appreciate it though. I'm talking to people. I'm talking to people who get it.
Absolutely.
Guys who get it. Let's go. All right, 7. Reading out my 2-factor Apple iCloud authentication on a live broadcast. Is that smart?
It hasn't started asking you to identify streetlights yet, has it?
No, not yet. Not yet. No. Where's the fire hydrant?
Any guesses for 31? Vivek says we can kill time by guessing who it's going to be. I will say Zach Peak, since I just wrote about him. I'll go with him.
Zach Peak. I'm gonna go the other Zach. Say Zack Watson. I don't think he's on the top. No, he didn't crack the top 30 here.
And as we're talking about this, like every single guy talking about in years past is on these lists. It's crazy about Zack Watson. It was in 2020 guy not being here. Let's see this. I got to it, guys. I got to it.
Zach, what's your guess?
I'm going to go with Zack Watson as well.
You guys be right. I don't think I'm allowed to guess, but I also don't remember, so it would truly be a guess. Feel free to get this out. This is just
no. This is staying in for sure.
Okay. Keep it in. Scrolling. 25, 8, 30. Oh, we're all wrong. So I wrote up, I don't know how that's going to work. They had me do an extra player. They had me do a report, and I had Daryl Hernandez as the full report. That was the extra player. But
okay. I can respect that. Yeah, definitely.
But then it had me list the next 10 prospects starting at number 31, and I put Brennan Hanafy there.
I know Nick loves that. That's his boy.
So I'm very curious how that worked out. I'm looking at it now. It will mean that Hernandez just isn't in there at all, which is unfortunate, but it's all March. So what are you going to do? Yeah. The 10 that I put were Hanafy, Brandon Young, Watson, Michelle Don, Luis Gonzalez, Zach Peak, Felix Bautista, Robert Newsom, Cody Sedlock, Dante Williams.
All those names make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Great audio. Like I said, fantastic live experience for the listeners and the viewers. Now I feel really bad because I might have. I don't know how that. I hope they caught that.
I think they got it. And
worth the wait. Yeah.
We've all had like our on-air things that probably should have been edited out that weren't. So this is staying in. This was gold.
Yeah. Now you're really part of the club.
Sweet.
So, there we are, Joey Ortiz. Joey Ortiz is, coming back from an injury right now, and we know that the defense has always been really good. The reports about its defense now coming off the injury are really good. If he's healthy this year, could you see him picking up and really rising up mid-season lists?
I think so. It had continued to have the season that he was having last year. He would have continued to he would be even higher than he is. I guess like a Kyle Towers type path where you kind of, you spend the first month or so in Green, and then you go to Bowie for 3.5 months, and then, you pack your bags up with Adley and you go to Norfolk for the last month of the season. Like that would have been him. We're talking about those two guys as guys who are on the verge of we're on the verge, free advertising, who are on the cusp of being in the leagues, and in Adley, possibly being on the opening day roster. So I think that is, and I think that what it's like the Orioles are kind of viewing these guys is like, if you hurt, like that's obviously like you're not going to get punished for that, but if you know that you are performing at the level that you were before, you don't have to repeat grade. When you talk about someone like, Michael Elias talking about T. Hall, like if he's throwing strikes, he's in the big leagues, because that would have been the case if he was healthy all last year. And I think that somebody like Joey Ortiz, who they really like, who would be truthfully a very, very emblematic, I guess, success story for this player development department that they're trying to, trump it up and feature. I think that someone like him, making his debut, have really good starts to the season, being higher on prospect lists is, part, and he'll deserve it, but B, the Orioles will want that to happen too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I loved hearing Elias say that about DL Hall. I mean, it just proves that, they're not just going to stick to baselines with, if they think someone's ready, they'll have them up, at least now that they're kind of turning the corner a little bit, trying to be more competitive.
Yeah. I mean, they were cognizant of like wasting bullets like a couple of weeks into the season last year, like with him, and they were very cautious with Grayson Rodriguez for good reason, because they think he's really good and they want to make sure that he's really good in the big leagues sooner rather than later. But I think they knew, I think they're not really the wasting bullets type. I think they know what they have in those guys, and they need to see it at Harbor Park for very long.
Now, here's a question just more about just making a top 50, top 30 list in general. We found that even though no games had been played from the end of the 2021 minor league season to the time we updated our top 50 list about a month or so ago, that we had way more changes than you might expect just from, no baseball being played. And you did your list shortly after the season ended. If you, had more time, if you had done it in January or February, you think your top 30 would be any different?
Probably, possibly. I think that, I think parts of my list being due at BA when it is, the bad part is was usually that it was like the end of the season and I was just like really tired, and I'm still covering this, and like it was just a lot of stuff to do. But the good news, this part of my mind, was that I was operating completely fresh. There are some mid-season updates, MLB.com will do it after the draft. There's some here and there. People do refresh their lists and people do updates, but I feel like it was a clean reset for me. And that's really valuable to me. I don't like when I know I have to do something to like see it already done, like see someone else's version of it. There was a very young profile Adley Rutschman written early in 2019 that I was like, I'm gonna have to write a story about Adley Rutschman at some point, so I'm just not gonna. And like, there's like, I just don't influence at all like that. So I think that there might have been changes, but that would have been through being able to talk to people more. Somebody like Kobe Mayo, we saw it on the last one. I was just like, I'm going to be the guy who puts the top, on my flag there. And like everybody like passed my flag. They're like, that's nice. I got 6. And like, what are you going to in October, I thought like based on what he had been doing at the time that, and like where he was in his development, like behind, maybe behind the development curve, considering he played a half season after missing all of 2020. I don't know if I didn't value the results enough. I don't know if the results were valued elsewhere. I don't know if the hype just started building. But, it happens, and it happens over the course of an offseason. It happens as more and more lists come out where you look back and you're like, oh, did I do that? Should I have done that? And then and you kind of go from there. But I'm sure there would have been, good to answer your question, but I really like the part where I knew that a lot of things have happened since, the big lists have been updated, and that gives me kind of clearance to write it as I see fit.
Yeah, I like that answer.
Just looking at the system as a whole, and now you as more in this fan role, you get to sit back, enjoy minor league baseball a little bit more. Outside the obvious names like Adley, Grayson, DL Hall, Gunnar Henderson, are there guys in this system that you are personally really excited to follow this year?
Yeah. I'm really interested just in general, like go down to Delmarva at some point early in the year and see what a team full of like 20-year-old international signings look like. I've seen Orioles affiliates play against them, but I've never had the ego to pay attention to them like you would if they were wearing, the Orioles, affiliates colors. Really lame way to say that. Yeah, I think that's going to be really fascinating, like how that transition goes and how, some of these players look as the season goes on. I think that I'm fascinated to see who of that kind of mess of pitchers that spent most of the year in like Delmarva and Aberdeen, like who makes a jump and is really like, okay, like thanks for babying me last year, but like it's my day and I'm going sick. Like, it's going to be good. Because I think the Orioles are really anticipating seeing who does. I think they have a lot of ideas of who that could be. I'm really interested to see what the 2 T pitchers are able to do. I know we spoke to Carter Baum on Zoom last week, whenever that was. All that stuff kind of got buried because of the lockdown. He said he was pretty much full go. I don't know that I've seen anything on Hanafi, but I'm really interested to see what's going on there. I know that the Orioles were really, really excited with how he came into spring training last year and all the work he was able to do at home. I think there's a lot. It's mostly the pitching side. To be quite honest, I think that there's going to be a lot of good performances that are drafted just by virtue of them drafting good college hitters. Those types of guys will sort themselves out. You'll know who's good because they will hit well. But it's pitchers that really are going to be the focus for me as this year.
That's a good point about Delmarva, because I think that the idea of a low A roster that's full of 20-year-old international signees and other organizations is not that unusual in this day and age. But for the Orioles, pretty much unprecedented. And now you're going to have it at Delmarva this year.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot to gain from getting that experience for those players, for just like, hey, I'm playing every day and it's going to be hard. You're going to do it. And I think that there's also a lot of value to be able to see, the potential. You see the potential on the. Remember when I used to do, Red Sox minor league stuff, there used to be like 4 guys who were signed to stops on like every team, and they were all really talented and really athletic, and you could dream on them, and everyone could dream on them. Scouts would dream on them, and they'd come in and trade for them, and people who watch the games would to see what kind of talent out there. And I think that it's going to be a really unique situation down there that I'm very interested in seeing how it goes.
Yeah, it does seem like that's when a player can really explode onto a scene, is going from FCL to full season ball. Like I know Julio Rodriguez, Christian Robinson, those types of players, you didn't really hear too much about them until they hit full season ball and just exploded.
Yeah. And that's, and just by virtue of opening up this avenue to acquiring talent, the Orioles are opening up the possibility that it could happen with them. All it takes is one player to make a whole international program, The Nationals spent a lot of money on Victor Robles, and he turned out pretty well. He's a big leaguer, but like also Juan Soto. Like that's all you like when everyone asks what we're doing this for, like you just say, hey, that guy's why we're doing this.
So we'll go over to the new collective bargaining agreement now, and the fact that the lockout is over. You wrote about the lockout over at your newsletter. Just kind of general thoughts now that the lockout is behind us about sort of the state of baseball and what you see in the CBA that you maybe like or you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, it was very weird, to be perfectly honest. Like, to give a teacher, I survived my first work stoppage in baseball. It was just a very bizarre, thing to see happening. I was really heartened by the way that like the players' stances were represented in the media and how they represent themselves. That's just like a large scale. But I think that the gains that players made in trying to increase like minimum salaries and get players paid earlier, have more money able to young players. I think all that fantastic. I think those are gains that will, serve the union very well going forward, and it's dropping the bucket for MLB and the team. So like they shouldn't have been fighting it as hard as they were. But I think that I'm one of those like, tanking is bad people. Obviously, I covered the Orioles and I didn't as it was happening, so I can't really say that now. But I do wonder. If the system that's been abused for so long, if anything really happened to change that, frankly. Bills, if this is the year that, Manny Machado and Adam Jones and Zach Britton and all those guys were about to hit free agency and the Orioles were staring down the face of tearing everything down and rebuilding again, I'm sure they would probably do it in a very similar way. And even if they had this exact office, they'd be like, sure, we could pick 9th here, but like sometimes we pick a player that the world thinks is the 9th best player. So what does it matter? We're just going to take these players that we think are good, and it doesn't matter if they would have been picked first 8 picks, because we're going to take the guy we think is good. We're going to use our bonus pool, as best as we can, and we're going to trade players for younger players and not have a high payroll. I don't think that those things are going to change. I think what's really fortunate for the Orioles perspective, and I've been trying my best to find a way to articulate this in letter without sounding like I'm just like completely bought in, is like I really do think that they're past the point of like rebuilding. I wonder if if we need like a new word for it. Like they're not, obviously, they're not going to be going out and getting like some big time starting pitcher, but like I don't think you can say that they are rebuilding right now. So none of this applies to them. I think they are somewhere in. I do think there's going to be another Orioles, and I think if one of the main priorities of this work stoppage was to make it that can't happen again. Obviously, the league doesn't care that these things happen, and ultimately they didn't do a lot to change it.
Yeah, the one thing us and I'm sure a lot of Oriole and baseball fans in general are hoping for is to curb the service time manipulation. And they kind of tried to make an effort to do something about that with, if you finish in the top 2 in the rookie of the year voting, you get your year back. Or if you finish in the top 3 and you started the year with the team, then the team gets a draft pick. Do you think this is enough to keep Adley Rutschman from having to go back to the minor leagues to start the season to get that extra year? Or what do you think about that?
I have wondered, as it's gotten further away from just like the rush of detail. It's like a pick after the competitive round. If you somebody up for the full award, is that something I saw? You get a draft pick that's basically like 30s.
I believe so.
Bounce round. Because if it's after the first, like, that's really valuable. I do wonder like how the Orioles would weigh like getting another pick, especially if it happens. Like, so next year they're going to be in round B. They're going to be in the 70s. You get like, what, $800,000 for that value. So if they are like, okay, we can, be losing, potential, 30 Adley Rutschman time or whatever year that would be that he's, free, whatever, but we can have an extra like $1.2 million in our draft pool in a year that we might be picking a little bit at first. Like, that makes a huge difference. I'm not sure that makes enough difference, but I think that's probably speculation they're making right now. Also should know better or like more firmly like where draft pick is, but I know that there could be like significant like for them to do that on the draft pick. I don't know if it's enough, but I think that it could move the needle.
Do you think the Rule 5, that's a favorite of Orioles fans,
Yeah.
but do you think losing the Major League phase of the Rule 5 draft, do you think that hurts or helps the Orioles, or it doesn't really matter that much this year?
It's probably a wash. I like Orioles fans who care about 05 draft probably would have gotten really upset if people got taken away from the Orioles too in that. So it's kind of just a wash. I think that there would have been I'm sure would have been interesting players. I'm sure they spent more time than they ever would have imagined getting ready for it, considering they probably thought it was going to happen and have a ton else to do. But imagine if they're just like some like can't miss. They had like a real catching backlog. I don't remember how they resolved it, but I know they had like really like highly touted catchers, and they had one on virtue of you can't have like a million catchers on your 40. Sure enough to not have a Rule 5 draft, but if the Orioles, we need to have this guy, and like we need to add this talent to our system, and like we're gonna have this catcher on the roster all year, but also Adley Rutschman's gonna start in Norfolk, and like it's gonna be this like awkward thing where like we're doing this thing for the long-term future, and also like not having Adley Rutschman, weird stuff like that. Huge difference. No, there's not a Tyler Wells in every draft. There's not a Garrett Whitlock draft. I think this would have been the last year where you can kind of like get some of those pandemic benefits that team really got in 2020. But I think it's going to be a wash.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Your newsletter is always a highlight. Whenever it shows up, I wake up, first thing I do, check my email. Oh, John wrote one of his newsletters. First thing I'm going to do is read that, especially during the lockout when there was absolutely nothing going on. That was like a godsend. What has transitioning to that been like for you versus when you were writing for the paper?
It's starting to feel different now versus January and February. I was basically doing the same things that I would be doing in a normal off season. As working at the Sun. Those times I'd put on and it'd be like nighttime, and I'd like, oh, I have to write something for the morning, and I'd figure it out. Now I just have to less often, and I have a freedom as to what that is. Content wise, I feel like I'm still to write the stories I like to write and report types of stories. I'm grateful to have maintained the access that I have to those players and coaches. That's been really benefit. analysis wise, I feel like I'm able to try different things. You know, I don't know if I was a beat writer working at the newspaper of record, I would have been able to be like, isn't it funny that like Orioles Twitter thinks Carlos Correa signed for the Orioles, and they keep spamming the Orioles account every time they get something and say, hey, when it's Carlos Correa, it's really funny. I don't know that I would have been able to write about that at the Baltimore Sun. It's this week. You know, not be I'm trying to figure out what the newsletter could or should like at this time, because you know the reality is during the season I'll be able to go to Camden Yards and go to minor league game. I'm going to keeping up of reporting and analysis that I want it to be, but without being able to be there, without knowing, you know, quite frankly, what like other people are on. Like I don't want to like have the Orioles like set up an interview with someone and then read that he talked to the media because they're all there. Because there's not. This is about delivering value to readers and trying to write stories that they can't find anywhere else. And if I'm, you know, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to be stuck doing things that people are doing. So it's going to be a weird month, you know, perfectly honest. People should subscribe, obviously, but I really don't know what it's going to look like this month. I don't know. It'll be more shorter thing, like recapping what's happened in spring training, with some takes on it. It's experimental. It's been really fun. And I really appreciate everyone, including you guys, who's been following and putting that out there. It's been really neat that there's still an audience for it. You know, I'm not a brand. I haven't been around nearly as long as anybody who's done this, who's done this on the Orioles beat. But it was nice to realize that people still had an interest, even if it wasn't under the Baltimore Sun's banner.
Yeah, I don't know who's listening to this that isn't already subscribed, but if you're listening and you're not, what are you waiting for? Go do it.
Yeah. It's free. I never mentioned that it's free. I don't know that it'll be free forever.
That's fine.
But I never mentioned that it's free now, and I shouldn't even say that it's not going to be free later. It's free now. And a good deal. That's a really good deal.
Agreed.
You know, I've been reading your newsletter, you know, every day that it comes out. One of my favorite pieces of yours you wrote recently was a case against the Orioles going with their usual path of stockpiling minor league free agent pitchers right as we come up to camp. And that's something we've seen them do time and time again in the last few years. And now here we are, spring training has started, and that speculation seems to be coming back around a little bit. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that and what you think the Orioles should be doing right now.
Well, my thoughts are they should not sign those types of players. And I feel like it's only, I'm not sure if it's like selectively seeing it, but I feel like I've seen like a handful of the, like, you know, kinds of pitchers the Orioles would sign to like, maybe you could be in our rotation deals, getting signed elsewhere. But like the guys are getting like $500,000 million if they're in the big leagues versus like the Orioles standard, like, you can have $1 million, you make our rotation, you're probably going to make our rotation. You know, I feel like if that's going right, then the Orioles really shouldn't be. You know, then they should just search for somebody who they believe is going to be better. That's actually part of what will be part of tomorrow's news. Like, but I think that especially, and this is a big if, especially if it seems like Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall are close to being candidates to pitch in the big league rotation. Michael Ives, they are. Those types of, you know, there's not a ton of value in those minor league agent types. I do think that the Orioles wanted to, you know, I think if there was a move to make this offseason in terms of free agents, I do think that there's like a handful of guys who might require another Jordan Lyles contract, maybe require a little bit more, maybe give them a bigger option for 2023. But I think that the Orioles would be in a really good spot if they did. Do I think they're going to? Not really, but I think they should. I think that if you have Jon Meoli and you have what they believe Jordan Lyles would be, and then, you know, I think like a list of, you know, a Danny Duffy, a Michael Pineda, like a Matt Boyd or something like that. Like those guys at the top of the list that are going to come big league deals, if you have them in place and then you add, a Grayson Rodriguez to the mix, one of those guys who was up and down last year steps up, like all of a sudden that's like a competent rotation, and you're going to have a competent lineup. You're going to have a lineup that gets better as the year goes on. So that's where I would go. I would, most of the that I write, I believe, and that one I really believe that, like, there's just no point in like signing those guys who, like, it's like been a couple of years since they're good, but they're good enough to be in the Orioles. There's no real benefits to that anymore.
I don't know if Bob or Zach had any other questions, but now that we're here, I think it was one of your most recent posts as well in the newsletter was about kind of how to cut through the verbiage that we're going to hear over spring break. Now that spring break's going on right now, I guess my mind's there. But spring training, what kind of storylines are you most excited for now that spring training games are just a couple of hours away now?
I'm really fascinated to see how all the pitchers, all those 2019 Bowie rotation, for lack of a better term, plus Keegan Aiken. I'm really fascinated to see how that group shakes out and is regarded and how they're used in spring training, because that will say a lot about how they're going to be, where they're going to start. Or the Orioles think they're going to have a chance to be on the team early, or, if somebody's throwing like 1 inning stints early, it's because they're going to go to minor league camp and get built up because the season starts a little later. I'm really interested to see how the outfield dynamic is. Interested to see like what Anthony Santander looks like. I think that he had physical issues before. He had him last year, and I think it accounts for a lot of the struggles he had. But I think somebody who probably could be back to the guy that he was. I'm interested to see, I'm just always fascinated by Jon Meoli. He's hard on himself. He thinks he's the worst pitcher in the world, and he's like 3 runs in 5+ innings, and he's like, I stunk out there. I didn't have anything, and you're like, all right, come on, buddy. But I think that over the course, obviously, no hitter, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball early in the season. I think that he really has a feel now of like what the best version of himself is, and I wonder if he's just going to go out and be that again. A lot of things, but I'm glad that it seems like there's a ton of roster competition this year. I know to the extent that that's true, it just doesn't feel like it. I know that the patient's settled, and honestly, once you get past the 4th name in the bullpen, you're talking about guys that most people don't know who they are. So where's the argument going to be between the 7th bullpen guy? So I think that it's going to be really interesting to see, just a straight here's what you should pay attention to versus who's going to be the 5th fielder type camp. And truthfully, I'm really excited to read what Nathan's going to do down there, having club access for the first time in 2 years. The rest of the beat, Zach, the new MLB.com reporter. I just think that that's what I'm most excited for. I'm excited to read stories and be like, oh, I know how that came about. I can imagine it came about, and awesome and good for them. It's versus the day stuff.
Sounds
John,
good.
we really appreciate you coming on tonight. Can you tell our listeners where, number one, how to find your newsletter, and then when they can expect to see or read the Prospect Handbook? Yeah.
So the newsletter is through Substack. I tweet out everything on my Twitter, Jon Meoli. I think it's substack.meoli.com or johnmeoli.substack.com. But just go to my Twitter just to be sure. Toss your email. It's free. If you have Gmail, it goes to the promotions folder sometimes. So if you subscribe and don't see it, look there. It even goes to my promotions folder sometimes, which is kind of weird. And as for the handbook, I believe it's been printed. I don't know when it will be shipped, but I do remember there was digital edition offered to people who purchased it through BA, and it should be landing in people's boxes shortly if it hasn't already.
Well, John, we really appreciate you coming on. Bob, Nick, any final thoughts or questions?
I could talk to John for another 2 hours. I mean, this is great. So yeah, thanks for coming on. Always
thanks for having me. Are we going to get chirped from my internet? Probably.
No, it wasn't too bad. Wasn't too bad.
All right. Sorry about that, guys.
Praise it all. So we'll be back next week with a new episode. In the meantime, continue to follow us on Twitter at BSL on the Verge. And check out BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com for all the latest articles. And be sure to join the message board there to interact with readers and writers on the site. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens and our guest Jon Meoli, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to On the Verge.